It was interesting listening to Bill start off with his experience in front of Judge Marriage from the Eastern District of Virginia. I know there's some judges from the Eastern District here. I had been in AUSA in the Eastern District for a while, and you learn how to, when addressed, that you're supposed to go to the podium and you are supposed to stand up. I am sitting now, but a little of that is because I had one experience as an associate independent counsel, and had me go to a West Coast federal district, I won't name it, and as I was in front of the court and they asked me questions, I would stand to go to the podium as I was trained. And the judge would say, Mr. Howard, why do you keep standing? Would you please sit? We sit in this court. And I'd sit down. And he'd address me again, and I'd just automatically stand. And he said, Mr. Howard, I don't know why you're being so contemptuous. And I said, Judge, I mean, with all due respect, I'm not trying to be contemptuous. It's just how another court practices. And I'd sit down again. And he'd again ask me a question. I'd stand again. Finally, there were marshals behind me. And I got to the point where I finished that hearing. I ended up going back to Washington, talking to the independent counsel. I said, I'm never going out there again. It's too dangerous. And the reason I use that as a segue is because it's not a lot unlike fraud. What's contemptuous is certainly between those two courts is a matter of perception. And I think that when you look at fraud, it can be a matter of perception. Now, along with being a longtime prosecutor in a couple of federal districts, I had also been a law professor. And you're not going to get a lot of, don't get me wrong, I have some issues now with some of my clients in the Justice Department, but you're not going to get a lot of Justice Department bashing from me. I got to hear the end of the last panel, and I will agree with Alice. The vast majority of the, 3,000 plus prosecutors you see there, despite what you've seen on the news lately and despite what you have here, they do a hell of a job. They are probably the best attorneys in the country. I was a U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia. Alice has heard this from me before, but that group, the 350 prosecutors in that group, are the best attorneys in the country. I've got no doubt. But they have hard jobs. And a lot of times you are taking direction from people that sometimes you know, sometimes you don't. But without a doubt, because you make federal crimes out of almost all these things, the prosecutors in Main Justice and in the various U.S. attorneys' offices around the country aren't immune to the pressures that they see. Now, some of my presentation here today is going to be based less on what I've actually experienced. You're going to hear some of that, but more on just observations. I had been a law professor, and I have a tendency to kind of step back and ask myself why this is happening. Not a lot of empirical study. It's just an old hand taking a look at some very, very vivid problems. Now, some of the stuff you've heard, and none of it will surprise you. But when you look at where we are today, and when you look at what is happening with what's been deemed overcriminalization, and I'm going to accept that. We've certainly heard it. I'm not sure that we've really changed that much in the last 20 years, but some things have happened that have sort of changed the landscape. And without a doubt, when you talk about the cases that you see up here on this slide, I mean, the sort of cases I don't have to explain them to you because all of you know them. It changed the way we do business in this country. And I would imagine that if you take these collective investigations, and there are more that I simply didn't list, it affects probably most of the people we know, the investors. They were losing their money. They were losing their life savings. Their families were losing the money. I think all of us remember during the Enron scandal, what I thought were the very moving testimonials on CNN and whatnot by the Texas families that lost everything they had. People were mad. And when people get mad, that's how folks in Congress lose their jobs. It's really, from my standpoint, it's not a lot harder than that. You got investors who are upset. You got investors who want to see a change. And quite frankly, if you're doing your job as a congressman, you're going to change things. One of the easiest things to do, again, if I can it's great going last, but I'm going to cite all these guys. But if you can remember what Bill said, you know, if you're a hammer, every problem is like a nail. And what you do is you change things so they work better for you. You can listen to what your bosses say. This is George Bush's comment in 2002 with the passage of the Sarbanes-Oxley. Now, with Sarbanes-Oxley, keep in mind it's a lot easier to impose criminal sanctions to do rather than change what I think is the real problem, and that's just the financial system. It's funny, I was talking to Professor O'Sullivan, I know she's in here somewhere, at lunch, and you know, it's easy to address a lot of problems. I mean, I think easy for a legislature to address problems by simply passing laws that have criminal sanctions. It shows people that you mean business. It shows people that you are serious about doing your job, and it shows people that you are reacting to the outrage that's being demonstrated. Often I think that the real problem is the system. But the system wasn't going to be changed, and it certainly wasn't going to be changed quickly, and it certainly wasn't going to be changed before an election. This is a country that's certainly grown up, certainly since the 1850s, with the capital system as we know it, with corporations as we know it. But having criminal sanctions was really the easier way to go. And when you look at what we are looking at in terms of overcriminalization and what executives were facing, I think I'm not going to even attempt to recreate what Bill has given you, and I think that it is the perfect description of the problem that goes on in corporations. You have gone from taking crimes that are fairly obvious. Those are, I mean, you have your hiding money. You have your people who are just outright stealing and embezzling. You know those things. But what Sarbanes-Oxley did was it took criminal activity to a different plane. Now you're going to be facing as much as 20 years in prison. Those are Sarbanes-Oxley penalties. A $5 million fine as an individual, a $25 million fine as a company if you don't understand the procedures. I don't know Tyco very well. I mean, I met Bill once before. I took a look at Tyco. Bill was working with a childhood friend of mine, so I took a look. The company is unwieldy. And to suggest that that one individual can sign a form and say that I know that all of our internal controls are in place, to me is just, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but it's folly. I just don't think you can do it. Not as an individual. But what Sarbanes-Oxley is saying is, you better learn. And what Sarbanes-Oxley is also saying is, you better get your house in order. Because if you don't get it in order, and you don't do this job the way we want you to, we're going to do it for you. We're going to penalize you, and we will put you in jail. We'll make the teeth very, very real. And keep in mind what Sarbanes-Oxley does. It makes it so that the whistleblowers, the ones that Paul referred to in his clip, some of these guys might be right, some of them might be wrong, absolute protection. And you better protect them, because you'll be penalized for that. If you're a lawyer in a corporation, Section 307, special section, you must come forward. Can't think about it. You better, or else you will go to jail. And I'm kind of picking on Sarbanes-Oxley because when you talk about the problems that we see right now, they're with financial institutions and they're with publicly traded companies. And so we're usually seeing issues that sort of touch on Sarbanes-Oxley. But keep in mind that, again, a lot of this, how corporations are going to deal with the public, how corporations are going to handle themselves, in my estimation, they are coming from messages from the top. And you'll see it in other agencies in the government. I just wanted to, a couple of examples. I have been representing an individual in an investigation in front of the Environment and Natural Resources Division. And he works for a state agency the state agency was given the responsibility of testing lead in the water pipelines in a particular city. But these are all things I was learning during the representation. But the way the lead was tested, the way it was, the way the water was tested, so that it can then be tested for lead. And Paul, you might know this, or maybe you can help me with it, because I'm still learning it. But there are two methods. One was essentially to turn on the water, let it run for 5 minutes, and then you take a sample, and then the homeowners in the area then have a testing kit. There's a second method. The second method is to turn on the water, stick your finger under the faucet, and wait for the temperature to change. And then you give it to the homeowners to test. And there was some debate, from what I can tell, within EPA about which of those methodologies should be used. But this agency simply got confused. They made a filing, and there was a criminal investigation because the filing apparently misidentified which one of the tests were actually used. Now, the argument I made to the attorneys at the time was, do you really want to go through an opening or closing where you are imagining a finger being stuck under the faucet and saying, send this person to jail? But, what I believe what you're finding is that there is a different attitude. People want to do things differently, and I think a lot of that is coming from the top. This is a statement from a recent hearing in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, taking a look at the Justice Department's handling of corporate fraud cases. As a result, you can see there are currently, when I say currently, I picked this number up in January of this year. There are currently about 530 cases. You've got some A-list companies being investigated. You know them all: AIG, Countrywide Financial, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. They're all on the list. And there have been two recent bills in which bills introduced in which are going to be added agents and added prosecutors in order to carry this out. The one message you will learn when you are a federal employee, and especially a federal prosecutor, is more is better. And you want more people, you want more agents, you want more prosecutors. You know that's what's going to be rewarded, and so that is what you do. That is what you do. And you find the cases where you can, and the corporations are clearly the easier targets. And this message not only comes from Senator Leahy, but it also comes from the President. These are things that the public hears and the prosecutors hear. I'd like to just play this short tape. I think all of you have seen it, but hopefully it makes my point. Joe?
Thank you. Thank you. This is a corporation that finds itself in financial distress due to recklessness and greed. Under these circumstances, it's hard to understand how derivative traders at AIG warranted any bonuses, much less $165 million in extra pay. How do they justify this outrage to the taxpayers who are keeping the company afloat? In the last 6 months, AIG has received substantial sums from the U.S. Treasury. And I've asked Secretary Geithner to use that leverage and pursue every single legal avenue to block these bonuses and make the American taxpayers whole.
As a line prosecutor, you watch that. As an investor, you watch that. Another observation, and again, these are just mine, is that when you look at what's going on, when you look at what's going on right now in the economic world, this is part of what I believe is our economic policy. When we look at what happens with these investor suits, when we look at what happens with the collapse of a place like something like Enron, we are losing, and it's been alluded to, we are losing foreign investors. We can't afford to do that. And the government needs to make overseas investors understand that they can take their money, they can bring it here, they can invest it in U.S. corporations, and it will be safe. And the way you do that is you let them know that, that for those who mess with your money, there are criminal penalties. The president has said so. Senator Leahy has said so. And you've heard quotes from other people. Now, the burden falls on the shareholders in terms of actually paying, but it's the corporation that carries it. Since these are going to be criminal investigations, if you really want to win at cards, what you do is you need to know what the other guy's got in his hand. That's the easiest way to do it. The government, in terms of how it wants to handle these things, how they want to handle a criminal investigation, has decided that if we are going to take a look at you, it's going to be your responsibility, corporation, to turn these people over. You need to find who they are. You need to tell us what they are. Internal investigations, I think everybody here at the table will tell you, they are expensive. You've got lawyers who charge, thank you, you got lawyers who charge, $600, $700 an hour. You're running 7, 8, 9, 10 lawyers in there. You are looking at documents. You're trying to handle things. These things run into the millions. But keep in mind, you find all this information out. We're going to talk about it a little more in the next panel. You turn it over to the government, and they have got a roadmap to how to take you down. It's easy to play cards when you know what the other side is doing. And the burden is on the corporation, and the government expects it. I was recently meeting with a prosecutor from the Antitrust Division, and she, very good attorney, I've known her for a while, and she insisted that my client, a corporation, an overseas corporation nonetheless, plead guilty to some criminal charges. And what I said to her was, okay, but what are you going to tell me that you have that I can walk back to my client and convince this general counsel that he needs to plead guilty? What can you give me? And her response to me was this. She goes, Mr. Howard, it's not my job to tell you what your client did wrong. And right then I knew I had a problem. But I was going to talk about this today on this panel, but we can do it on the next. If you go through what I call the generational memorandum, I'll give Judge Phillip a lot of credit if you actually look at the memos. Did you ever know his name's not on it? They don't call it the Phillip memo. That was pretty good. Very good. But the memoranda that you see that have come out of the Justice Department make sure that all the cards are on their side. I just want to, I say that, I'm going to certainly leave this for questioning, but there is good news, and the good news is this. The reversal of convictions sometimes come too late, but I know my time is about running out. But the good news is this. We are not China. In 2008, there was a gentleman by the name of Wang Zhengdong who sold a bogus ant farm scheme. Investors were paid €800 for a kit that he paid €16 for, promising something like a 600% return in their investment. He was found guilty in China of fraud and executed. We don't do that in this country, so if nothing else from this panel, there is some good news. Okay. Thank you. With that, Jeff?